So Angus, like, can you like introduce yourself for the audience in Taiwan?
Sure. So my name is Angus Ross. I've been working in sport for quite a while now. I guess I'm just trying to think how long it would be since the 90s. So yeah, 25 plus years, I guess. Um, have got a PhD in exercise physiology slash motor control. It's kind of a bit of a hybrid PhD in some ways. I was looking at effects on sprint training on the neuromuscular system and detraining as well. So which kind of relates a little bit to tapering, I guess. Um, and yeah, so that's kind of, and since then I've been working in sport. I worked in Australia, worked in New Zealand, worked with a variety of sports. Currently working with athletics in New Zealand and one rower. Kind of a random one. Yeah, so that's what I've been doing. Been lucky enough to work in elite sport for that period since both in Australia and New Zealand. So yeah, have worked. I was a former bobsleigh athlete. I did track and field badly as a young fella. I loved it, but wasn't particularly gifted. I moved to had an opportunity to try bobsleigh, which was probably suited the limited gifts that I did have better than athletics did, and so I did that for a number of years, and yeah, and then have worked in a little bit with bobsleigh in New Zealand, a little bit with skeleton, which is obviously another Winter Olympic sport. I've worked with sprint cycling, and currently in athletics at the moment. I'm sort of working with a variety of athletes, but we're probably most successful currently with our throwers, although there are a number of New Zealand sprinters that are climbing the ranks as well, which is kind of nice to see. We've got, Zoe Hobbs recently run under 11 seconds women's 100 meters. So yeah, things are looking up in that space as well. So yeah, that's kind of me.
Cool, nice man, nice journey. So, how how exactly did you get like involved or like get like notice the spine engine theory?
Yeah, I guess it's a bit of a long story. It probably started during. I've always been interested in sprint running, and the things that define it and what makes a good athlete and a less good athlete, what can be changed, what's trainable, all those sorts of elements. During we had a bit of a, obviously during the sort of COVID period, we had a bit of a lockdown here, and so there's a lot of time at home, sort of navel gazing, I suppose, and thinking about different elements. And I'd previously been involved for a number of years with sprint cycling. And one of the things that has intrigued me with sprint cycling, if you look at the relative differences between running and cycling, is that since 2000, the times in sprint cycling have dropped dramatically. And so the flying 200 in sprint cycling was fairly similar in time to the 100-meter sprint. I think until 2000, it was probably about 995 for the 100 meters. In actual fact, the 100-meter time was faster. The flying 200 is now at 9.1 seconds, and we've sort of stagnated since Usain Bolt in the 100 meters. And one of the things that sort of led me down that path was the gearing changes that had in cycling. And so they've gone to bigger and bigger gears. They cycle at the same frequency as they always did, but they use bigger gears and they go faster. And obviously that requires a bigger strength element. And so I just sort of started thinking, is there any way to change gears in sprint running? Given, you can't change gears per se because anthropometry is limited. You have a given leg length that you're born with. And what were other ways of looking at it? And it's not to say that the spinal engine piece is really anything to do with it, but that's where it led me. And I was looking at rotation. I worked with some throwers as well. And the concept of spinal engine essentially is that when you laterally flex to one side with a lordotic spine, you get an axial, sort of rotation of the pelvis. And that whole concept is, and it's led me to think, I wonder if you get more rotation of the pelvis, is there a greater time on the ground at the same speed of your center of gravity? And I guess that's where I started with that whole idea. Coming from the cycling model, could we change gears in running? If we could change gears, could we make better use of strength training and other elements that might allow us to run at high speeds and with longer on the ground. And I suppose that was one of the elements that the taller athletes that we've seen come to the fore. Certainly modelled by Usain Bolt. He's kind of the prototype that changed the mold. 1.96 tall. We've never seen a 100-meter runner that height being that successful before. And one of the interesting things with him is he can spend a long time on the ground because his contact length, the length of the distance he travels while his center of gravity travels while his foot's on the ground is proportionately longer than shorter athletes. So he therefore has more time on the ground at the same speed. Therefore, is able to make use of more strength elements, as opposed to somebody that's a shorter athlete. They have to turn over really fast, and they might be 80 milliseconds on the ground, and Usain Bolt can be 90 milliseconds on the ground. And it doesn't sound a lot, but that's more than 10% difference. And the longer you're on the ground, the longer time you have to apply force, the more MVC becomes a factor, as opposed to just fiber type. So I was, I guess my inclination was, is there another way of doing it? Is the spinal engine part of the solution to a gear change? And can we make our athletes faster by training this concept, I suppose?
So, like over the past few years during the COVID and after COVID right now, is there because there's a lot of system or concept talking about spinal engine theory, how should we train the concept? So
yeah,
what are your thoughts on training the spinal engine theory?
Yeah, good. That's the $60 million question, isn't it? I mean, that's the thing. But A, does it work? And B, how if it does work, how do you train it? And I think we have a lot of these talented athletes that inadvertently do this. They have a lot of lateral flexion, certainly in acceleration, and there's countless images of people sort of that whole and David Weck has probably popularized some of this stuff with the head over foot, and the lateral flexion. They bounce out of these positions with sort of counter rotations of the hips and shoulders. So yeah, how do we train it? Well, I would have to say at this point we don't know. We can surmise we can have some theories, but do we know? I would argue no. I'm lucky. I've got a PhD student who's currently doing 3D biomech in this space, and maybe in a year or two we'll have some better answers. But my guess is that you need to have range of motion. If you're stiff as a board and all you've done is sort of prone bracing or whatever all your life as your core training, and you don't actually, you're not able to laterally flex, or there's a limitation in your range of motion, that's probably something that could be addressed. I think there's probably, so range of motion and lateral flexion, range of motion and rotation, those things want to be within normal boundaries, I suppose, that you want to have that. Secondly, I would make the case for, and again, I'm not saying I know any of this stuff. This is me putting my 10 cents worth and being a little bit, guessing with a bit of education, I suppose. But that strength in those planes is important. We want to connect the pelvis, and we want to connect the shoulders, and we want to be able to move in that space. And it's funny. I was watching a how you get sucked into sitting on YouTube, watching too many videos on YouTube. And I was watching a video the other day, and there was Usain Bolt was being interviewed, and he was talking about the non-negotiables of his training, and he mentioned, ironically, that back and core were his non-negotiables. And as it happens, he was a spinal engine guy, if you for want of a better description, and so look, what's the best way to train it? I think there's a million ways to train it. I would argue that we're trying to set up these fascial slings on these diagonal patterns. How does fascia best respond to training? Again, you probably ask a million people, you get a million different answers in that space. I think it responds to repetition would probably be one part of it. That if we hold postures all the time, we get set in those postures. Our fascia, sets itself in that position. So I think, and typically, if you look to the way people have trained historically over the years, certain athletes are famous for doing thousands of reps. Certain sprinters are famous for doing thousands of reps of core training. Linford Christie, I think, used to do, allegedly do thousands of reps of core training. Alan Wells, also Olympic champion, used to do thousands of reps of core training. Alan Wells used to do speedball. Do you know what speedball is?
Yeah,
The boxing. Yeah, he used to do like a million reps of speedball.
Yeah.
And you look at some of that training, and it's metabolically totally inappropriate for sprinting. 6 times 3 minute rounds. It's like, the hell are you doing? But if you change that lens and put it through almost a fascial lens, maybe it was nothing to do with the metabolic benefits, but it was laying down these fascial slings perhaps, and that connected the spinal engine, and that was the facilitating piece of it. And I would make the case for, I'm sure you've seen some of David Weck's stuff, who's sort of certainly been prominent in this space, and some of his skipping rope stuff, that and these rotation, again, it's these same rotational patterns, speedball, usually going on in these patterns, the skipping stuff, and these different and I think that those repetitions create these patterns and these slings perhaps, or certainly enhance them, and maybe enhance the elasticity of these pieces, that you're working through these ranges and you're bouncing in and out, and it's kind of a rhythmic training rather than a big co-contracted muscular effort. So look, do I know that this is the case? No, that's my best guess. That sort of stuff is helpful. So train your range of motion, flexion, lateral flexion, and rotation, and train to essentially train. The high rep stuff is probably good. Train in multiple planes. Try and connect the system, and even I would even say, we know the lats are a big player in rotation as well. So train the lats, and is that core training per se? No, well, it could be. So we do some training with the lats when you might be doing one arm stuff and laterally flexing with it, and trying to link these properties. So yeah, look, there's no simple answer. I'm not saying we're right. I'm just saying this is our best guess at the moment. And you want to probably train across the whole spectrum. So you've got all these properties taken care of. You want to do some of it high rep rhythmic. You want to do some of it where you do some strength work, and it might be loaded rotations or loaded flexions or loaded extensions. Some of the Franz Bosch stuff is probably amazing too, in terms of having a single leg back extension with a row on the other side, or some of that stuff where you're connecting those diagonal slings. So look, everybody's got a piece of the puzzle, I would say, and it's just, and I guess that's part of the art of coaching, isn't it? That you go, okay, well, what does this person need, and you might have certain gifts there that you are your thing, okay, but you're crappy in this area here, so we're going to address that, maintain your gifts, and so it's that whole sort of the needs analysis piece, I suppose, with trying to find what you have, and let's find what you need, and go from there, I suppose.
Nice. So, since it's more like fascia sling, is it like is it more of a transferring the force?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. So you're certainly transferring the force, and look, the concept of the I'll just segue slightly to the left here a little bit, but concept of, there's a whole lot of things we don't know about the spinal engine in terms of from theory to application, and so there's two. We all have different body types, and some of us have a long trunk and short legs, and some of us have long legs and short trunk, and some of us are very lordotic, and some of us aren't, and the cause and effect of each of these parts, in terms of the only thing that matters really is the ground force, which is the outcome of these bits and pieces. And so does I guess finding out how these elements interact, and if you have a very flat back with very little lordosis, is training these things going to be beneficial for you? Maybe not. I don't know. I'm surmising that perhaps the lordosis is perhaps part of the factor that creates this axial rotation. But perhaps if you've got a long trunk and a flat back, the lateral flexion acts through transfer of energy, acts as a hammer, and you can come down and you bang into the ground. As your leg comes down, you hammer with the trunk as well. And again, I don't know this. I'm just postulating, and hopefully we will have this data in the next couple of years. So finding that that sweet spot is kind of important, and the needs that you have, and training accordingly. And once we have some of this information, I think we can better answer some of these questions as to, is it just a connector? Possibly, but I think it's a hammer as I personally I would think it's probably a hammer as well. And the hammer, the magnitude of the hammer will depend on your anatomy, and how violently you move in and out of these positions. And I suppose the thing that some people would say that if it was all about axial rotation and lateral flexion, when we accelerate, you'll notice people have this big lateral flexion, and some people sort of almost speed skate down the first 10, 20 meters. And then when we get to top speed, the amount of lateral flexion is much smaller. It's a subtle, but the rotation is maintained throughout. And, so there's almost a dissociation, I guess you could argue, from the degree of lateral flexion doesn't dictate the degree of axial rotation of the pelvis, which would be an argument against spinal rotation having much to do with it. You could make the case, but I guess the forces go up, and we know with some of these sort of viscoelastic tissues, as you increase the force, they stiffen at higher forces and higher rate of force developments. So maybe that linkage is maintained, because we know the ground, peak vertical ground force goes up quite a lot from the first couple of steps to max velocity, and so that might explain that sort of dissociation a little bit. But going back to the connection piece, yeah, I think that's right. I think there is a coordination element in it, and I'm not quite sure. And like if you look at some of the people that are prominent in the space, they're very much training that sort of rhythmic coordination space. And I think my gut feeling is they're probably right. I guess the art of coaching still sits in there, and how much do you need versus how much do I need? How much does the next person need? And again, how long is a piece of string? It's kind of like, we don't know that yet, probably. But I would suggest that certainly it would be remiss of you as a coach not to be training the trunk reasonably vigorously as in those planes, for running.
Yeah, love it. So I talk about like how spinal injury theory works as when we train like sprinter, but how does it work with when it comes to like thrower you train, or like let's say like baseball pitcher?
Yep. Yeah, look, I probably haven't given as much brain space to the throwing as I have the running over the years, but despite working with some throwers. But if you think about certainly I work with some shot putters, and if you think about if you're doing a rotational throw and you land so right foot down, then left foot down at the front of the circle, and you are laterally flexed over to that side, with the shot in your hand, laterally flexed, and if the spinal engine thing is correct, you laterally flex over the side, and then your right hand's back, but your right pelvis is coming forward, and so you put all these mechanisms on stretch. So again, that's beneficial. You get an elastic response, and it becomes a propulsive element. I kind of think that a lot of throws, in some ways, we often see throwers are amazing accelerators. These big guys that can haul ass over 20 meters, and they weigh 140 kilos or 130 kilos, and it's kind of like, I wonder whether, because they do a lot by definition, throwing and implement, they do a lot of rotational training, and I wonder whether there's a beneficial element to that inadvertently they are training spinal engine just by nature of their event. Now, do you need to do more resisted rotational fascial stuff to be an elite thrower? Of course, I'm going to argue yes, you should do. And some do, some don't. Some are very meat and potatoes with their training. They do clean squats and bench press and happy days, away they go. I would say certainly the example you just talked about, a baseball thrower, when you're throwing an extremely light implement at 160 kilometers an hour, that's a very whippy, and you couldn't do that purely muscularly. So you want to put these elements on stretch, and then it's sort of proximal to distal, isn't it? Like, so you have this, you get the hips forward, create stretch through the trunk, and this distal whip of the arm is the last, arm and hand is the last thing's coming through. Is that spinal engine? Well, it's certainly part of it, but it's not, it's not the only thing going on there. There's a lot. Throwing is a very complicated movement, and but yeah, I don't see how you could go wrong by training those elements. And certainly as I alluded to, I think the range of motion, because you want, if you're throwing an implement of any sort, the longer you can pull on it, the more time it has to produce impulse, and impulse will be directly related to release velocity. So train the range, train the strength and length, train those elastic elements, and obviously train your technical model to take advantage of those gifts that you do have, and then hopefully the implement goes fast and far.
So are these like exercise or like the mass like French balls or like the jump rope or like the like landmine university, all those should be like the element we've been talking about, the spine engine theory, but uh as a performance coach or as a strength coach, we all try to find a way to increase our athletes like power output or like try to let them like get them stronger. So like how much should we focus on these, or it's kind of like accessory work?
Good question. And I guess I'm not sure I can answer that well at all, because that is the art of coaching, isn't it? And it's kind of like there's probably some prerequisites that you have in terms of some of the other elements. The more meat and potatoes type stuff, as you might say in New Zealand, that the very basic, get those things all right. And if you haven't got if you haven't got a sufficient strength, you're trying to launch a mortar from a canoe kind of thing. It doesn't work well. So you still need strong legs. You still need all these other elements. And to me, that's kind of a no-brainer. And I just as another little segue, I suppose. I think people would like to characterize other people as he's a spinal engine guy, or he's this, or he's that. I don't consider myself that by any stretch. I want to train people to do better. And so is the spinal engine a thing that I consider? Absolutely. But I also want them to have, the strong elastic legs and, all that other element. I think we shouldn't pigeonhole ourselves in any one box and think this is it, because there's no magic bullet, is there? We all know that. You've been around long enough. I'm sure that you know that there's the training is a global thing. Sorry, I've lost what was the original part of the question? I've lost my train of thought there a little bit.
And I love that. My original question is like how much should we be focusing on like those like lateral sling or like rotation stuff?
Yeah, of course. So again, do the basics, have that stuff tidied up, but I would bleed that stuff in the whole way through. Like your landmine university stuff. There's some great pieces in there. Some of the bouncing rotation stuff, and you look at even some of the really prominent coaches in the States that have had these circuits, the bodyweight circuits they've done, the Dan Pfaffs of the world, Boo, all those sort of guys. They've all had these circuits that they've used. Keba, Torba, Kaba, they've all used these sort of elements. So they're training this stuff, whether they would have called it spinal engine, probably not, but they're training it anyway. Look, I think the people that hang their hat on that as their thing would probably say that it's an absolute must. But if you're a thrower, you're probably training a lot of it anyway, because you're doing you might be throwing different weighted implements, you might be doing medicine balls, you might be doing. So are you way behind on that stuff? Probably not. But is it going to add? It might be the icing on the cake, if you like. Yeah, it's kind of like the and I think perhaps training some of the elastic elements. If you're just used to just grunting big heavy weights, well, maybe some of the elastic elements and the range of motion and I think, are you familiar with the term hysteresis? Do you know what that is?
No. Can you like explain it?
Yeah, so hysteresis is kind of like, it's almost like friction in the system. It's like if you stretch something and then you let it
Oh,
recoil, um, if there's zero hysteresis, you get the same energy in as same energy out. And so doing this, I would suggest that perhaps doing some of those, bouncing rhythmic fascial exercises would decrease hysteresis. So you would become a more elastic, more energy efficient spring, if you like, in rotation or some of these other planes. So some of those elements, I think, you're probably again doing that, you're probably getting more energy return and for the same given stretch. So the input you get in, you get a better output. So yeah, I think all those elements, and I think you probably could have a sort of a force velocity curve. Some of that landmine stuff might be heavier, slower, still dynamic, but heavier and slower than perhaps the the skipping piece with the rotational skipping, where you're just doing the sort of side to side piece and high speed rhythmic. So yeah, would I say that a thrower should be doing that stuff? Yeah, I would. But I've got my own biases, of course, as well. So yeah, is it going to be the be all and end all? No, but it kind of makes sense to me that there's a relevance to it. Yeah.
I love the approach. I love the approach. I talk with like Rolf Ullman or
Oh yeah.
about like the spinal internship theory, and what his answer is like for all those years they've been training like sprinter or like jumper, they do things like lunges with rotation or like counter
Mm.
rotation, but they never really think of it as like spinal engine theory. It's more of a accessory work or like
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
core work of like the the whole workout. So the answer for him is a small piece of a whole bus. I
Yeah.
I love
And
that.
he's right. Yeah, he's right. All of these things they're all small elements of a wider thing, and it's knowing what, I went and saw a French guy, Jerome Simeon, who's worked with some prominent French athletes a few years ago, and he had this, I said, well, how do you know when to give them what in his model, and he had this, very sort of enigmatic French answer. He said, I give them what they need, and it's like, of course, yeah, but how do you, that it gives you all those other questions that fall out of that, obviously. But it's a very good answer that you give them what they need, and if that's the missing piece of the puzzle that helps them, great, rip into it. If it's not, and they've already really proficient at some of that stuff, well, it's probably not where you're going to find your next tenth of a second, is it, or meter per second and release velocity perhaps in your throwing. Um, but yeah, it's part of the puzzle.
Yeah, love that, love that. So the next thing I want to ask is, since we lo need a lot of like rotation or lateral flexion in our spine, and when we do like strength work, like a heavy back squat or like deadlift,
Mm-hmm.
it's basically asking us to like maintain a neutral spine. And
Yeah.
for personally, when I squat that heavy or I lift that heavy, there's always gonna feel a little bit rigid around like the lumbar spine. So
Yeah.
uh for sprinter like throwing athletes, uh how much should we be like uh doing heavy squat with them, or should we more focusing on like single leg workout?
Yeah, great question. And again, um, it's probably depends on the individual to a certain extent. If they're naturally very mobile and they can maintain that neutral spine and they can get a good benefit from it, great. They can probably get away with some of the stuff, the heavy squatting. But I'm like you. If I do heavy squatting, and I don't do any of that anymore, but I'm a bit too old for that sort of carry on. But my back it would not seize up, but it'd be stiff for a few days. And so there are obviously alternatives, as you've alluded to already: Bulgarian squats, lunges, multi-directional variants of those. You could also do, have you used the belt squat where you've
Yeah,
got
yeah,
the,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. So the belt squat, slightly different. We'll unload the back a little bit, and you still get a good stress through the legs. So yeah, look, I'm probably moving more to that. As I mature as a trainer, I guess. Yeah, but I think there is still a case for some of that limit strength going through the trunk. We know the erectors are an important piece of that sort of transfer of energy as well. So I wouldn't take it out, but you might limit it, and depending on how the athlete responds as well, that you go, okay, well, this is a problem. This person is, compromises subsequent training for the next 3 days. We need to pull the pin on that and do something else, and find another way of stressing those muscles without compromising, the other elements of training. So, yeah, that's a good question, and again, there'd be an individual response to that. And one of the throwers I'm working with currently, he's still doing a lot of heavy lifting, and does it compromise his mobility and some of his ability to output strength? Yeah, 100% it does. But we're in April. World champs are in August. Does it matter right now? No, it doesn't, because we can get that stuff back. But we're setting a foundation. So again, you need to put it in perspective of what are you trying to achieve? What's our time frame? What's the time course of training and detraining? And how long can we maintain these elements? What's the dose response for can we do two reps a week and maintain that for the next 10 weeks? Maybe we can. Cool. So that 2 reps a week isn't going to do much to compromise that sort of mobility or that load through the trunk. But if it's enough to maintain it, happy days. So I think all those pieces interact, and it's kind of finding our happy medium to maintain. It's non-negotiable that if you've got a shot putter, they've got to be pretty strong. Okay, that's a non-negotiable. Okay, now how long can we go with compromising the sort of the heavy squatting or whatever, and maintain still strong enough? Those, in the same way, same goes for any sport. The ratios will be different for every sport and every discipline, but you need to find that balance and then adjust accordingly. And I think you're right. I think in season doing heavy full range squatting, would probably compromise most people's speed. Some people might get away with it, and I certainly do a lot of people that would argue that the full range is too long and slow anyway, and they'll do partial range exercises and more of an RFD focus on that stuff. And I think that's probably right. And because the trunk is a little bit more vertical, the load on the back and the tightness is probably alleviated a little bit too. So hopefully that sort of ties in there.
I love your approach. So, besides like the spine, I know I put you in a hard position to answer those like spine engine theory, because like it's kind of popular right now, and everyone's saying there's like his theory is spine engine theory or like whatever it is. But besides like the spine engine theory, let's just go back to like what we do when we train like sprinters. So I know like France has his like hip lock or like counter rotation. I know
Yep.
like Otis has his like they have like a they hold their like stick for over their head or in front of their body
Yep.
to do like their dynamic core stability. So
Yep.
for you personally, what would you like train like what would you do to train like the sprinter's core exercise?
I think all of those things are good. And again, I've been drawn to, I don't know why I've been drawn to, maybe it's I've got Scottish ancestry, but I'm just not sure if you're familiar, but a lot of the professional sprinters from Scotland back in the day used to do this speedball, and they used to and it was probably compromised because they were freezing cold in the middle of Scottish winter, and so they're in a little shed and they're hitting a speedball, and and I've always looked at this thing going, what the hell is that all about? And there's a lot of people are very derogatory about speedballs for sprinters. It's bloody crazy. It's got nothing to do with anything. Again, but if you put that spinal engine lens on it and you're doing, they do this typical thing with 6x3 minute rounds, and they do these high repetition, trying to get 600 to 800 hits in 3 minutes. which is pretty fast, and it's almost you're four strikes a second, which is pretty similar to sprinting. And so maybe there's a timing piece, maybe it's just this million reps and this sort of blah 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 blah. And you can and at the end of when you get good at it, your legs are really tired at the end of it too, because you're sort of gripping the ground, and so this transfers through the whole body. And you know what? People run fast when they do it, and I don't know why. I think I have my theories obviously in the spinal engine piece. So you could do a lot worse than doing that. And when I look at it, it's not really any different to, I'm not sure what the methodology is for like the weak method skipping rope stuff, but I'm sure those are quite long duration, stuff they do there. And I don't think it's probably that dissimilar. And so these people are all finding the same answer to different problem. And like I alluded to before, Linford Christie, was, and I don't even know if this is true, but I remember working with a sprint group in Australia a number of years ago, and they used to have these Linford Christie this ab circuit that allegedly Linford Christie did. And it was hundreds and hundreds of reps of these, multi-planar core work. And if you ever saw Linford Christie with a shirt off, he had the pretty outrageous core on him, six pack, and all the rest of it was. So all of these people are answering the same problem, and so I think, the high rep piece. I think some of the Franz Bosch stuff is probably more strength related. And when I say strength, that might be more of a muscular type focus. And so I think you need a combination of some strength related stuff and the higher rep work, which I think you learn to bounce in and out of these positions. And I can't imagine that if Linford Christie was doing 1,000 reps a day, he wasn't doing these slow, controlled, purely muscular, no stretch reflex stuff. He was probably bouncing in and out of these positions, which was probably advantageous. So yeah, look, there's no magic bullet. There's probably plenty of different options, but if you cover that spectrum of strength, range of motion, and some elasticity work, medicine balls, all that sort of stuff, you probably do pretty well. And I made this point in a presentation ages ago. I was always intrigued by, do you remember Daphne Schippers, the Dutch female sprinter?
Yeah.
So she was an outstanding, like 2015, she was an absolute rock star. She was running 1080 and 2163, I think she ran. And she was a heptathlete before that. And even in 2015, she did the May Gotsis, which is one of the primary multi-events competitions outside of World Champs every year. And she did Gotsis and started the heptathlon there, and then decided, I think she had a knee injury, maybe from high jump perhaps, but she was running like 22 point running the 200 and the heptathlon, which was pretty outrageous at the time. And the interesting thing to me is, so as a multi-eventer, by definition, you're training spinal engine because you're throwing, you're hurdling, that's the other thing I haven't mentioned. Hurdle drills. What do you do in hurdle drills? You hit your hip and you're doing all this spinal engine training. So people do thousands of reps of hurdle drills, spinal engine training. And it just depends on the lens you put on. It doesn't like that. So, again, I would put that as part of your core training too. But going back to Daphne Schippers, the ironic thing to me was when she was a heptathlete and she spent, she trained this big heptathlon base, and then, Gotsis is usually the end of May, and then World Champs are probably July that year. I can't remember the dates, but so after Gotsis, she said, nah, my knee's sore. I'm just going to sprint for the rest of the season. And she goes to World Champs and runs 2163 in Beijing and 1081. I think she might have got second, silver or bronze in the 100, and she won the 200 with one of the fastest 200s of all time. And the ironic thing, and she was still really young. She might have been like 23, 24 at the time. And everybody's going, oh, she's going to just own the sport. And I don't know what happened, whether it was injuries or anything else, or whether it was she moved away from the heptathlon training, which actually was the spinal engine piece that made her great. And then she became a little bit more robotic and a little bit more traditionally sprint trained, and didn't run as fast. She never ran as fast again. And there's certain amount of irony there that and it could, I might be talking complete bullshit here. It might have been she had a back an injury and it all turned to custard. I don't know. But just looking from the outside, me putting my own theories on stuff I don't know much about probably, but confirmation bias and all that stuff. But it seemed interesting to me that there might be some relevance in that, and she certainly became a more she took more steps. She went from, I think she took one more step when she was not doing the multi-events training to when she was doing the multi-events training. So that one more step was, it's 0.2 of a second, 0.25 of a second, and that's about what she ended up running. She maintained her frequency, or maintain the frequency and drop stride length, all of a sudden she goes from 1081 to 1105 or whatever she went the next year. And that's an interesting. But what's the best way of training it? Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. But all those things are part of it. I think like the hurdle drills, I should have alluded to that earlier. I think the hurdle drills are really because there's that sort of slight hip hitching element and the core and you're on your feet and it's highly specific and look, coaches have been doing this is nothing new, is it? Coaches have been doing hurdle drills for decades and decades, and they probably were bloody right the whole time. They wouldn't have put the spine engine lens on it, but when you interpret it through that lens, all these things become, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense now. So yeah.
Yeah, love that. So, for you mentioned a lot about like high rep, and I know probably mentioned it, but can you like explain to us why like high rep of like these exercises is important?
Well, to me, I'm again, it's me postulating, but I think a number of coaches have said to me, and Dan Pfaff is probably one of them that has sort of said to me, you build fascia by repetition, and this bouncing repetition, and so the high rep piece would be in those elements, trying to build those fascial areas of fascial density, so that you have this rebound, and so that piece is covered to me, and the high rep piece is probably relevant. That said, I think of fascia and tendons. There's a couple of papers I remember reading, and they had quite an eloquent term. They sort of said they talked about tendons, and I would say they didn't say this, but I would say fascia is in the same boat. Tendons are muscle amplifiers was the quote, and I forget who it was. I think it might have even been in one of the animal literature. And tendons are muscle amplifiers, and if you put that onto fascia as a muscle amplifier, so you want to train the fascial piece, but you also want to train the muscular piece. So the lower rep strength work would be muscular piece, in my mind at least, and the higher rep stuff might be the elastic bouncing, the fascial piece, and then that'll kind of okay. You want the engine, and you want to be able to amplify that engine with the fascial slings and the elastic elements. So yeah, does that answer your question? Is kind of that's why we do
Yeah. Of course,
both.
of course.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
So that's like kind of all the questions I have for you today. So if there's
Cool.
like coaches and therapists are interested in what you're doing right now, or they're interested in what we are talking about today, where can they find you?
So I'm on Twitter. I don't post a hell of a lot on Twitter. Sometimes I do. I get in a roll and I post a few things, but I don't tend to post a lot. I guess my so that's probably the easiest way. If you flick me a message on Twitter, I'll probably answer it. As you've seen, I'm sometimes a bit slow, but if you keep at it, I will reply. Or yeah, I mean, you can probably track my email down. Just searching for me. I'm not going to put that out because again, you'll be able to find it. If you're interested, you can find it. It's online. So yeah, look, those things are out. They're all accessible, but those are probably the main mediums. At this stage, I'm not really a massive social media guy, and that might change in the future. I don't know, but yeah, I'm working for an organisation, so I don't do a lot of that stuff. But yeah, happy to. If people want to correspond, happy to answer. Yeah.
Appreciate it.